Welcome to WorldatWork TV. I'm Allison Avalos, and I'm joined today by Executive Compensation Practice Leader Sue Holloway, and we're talking about the CEO pay ratio. So this goes all the way back to the Dodd-Frank Financial Reform Law of 2010, and the SEC was charged with the controversial CEO pay ratio and rules to implement that portion of the law. And they went through a commenting period, and there were hundreds of thousands of comments received. It's certainly a controversial piece of this law. And now today we finally have some final rules. So let's get into those rules. Talk first about what that ratio is.
Sure, Allison. So it's basically basically but not simply, the ratio of the annual total compensation of the CEO to the median annual total compensation of all employees excluding the CEO. So it's a ratio of those two numbers, and it's disclosed in the proxy statement, generally speaking.
And when is this effective?
So it's effective for full fiscal years beginning on or after January 1st of 2017. So for calendar fiscal year companies, that means the proxy season beginning in early 2018.
And does this apply to all U.S. companies?
Generally speaking, there are a few exceptions, but for the most part, all publicly traded U.S. companies. Emerging growth companies, foreign issue, and some smaller companies are excluded.
So on the surface, this requirement might seem fairly straightforward, but we know from the commenting period that it could be quite challenging and costly for companies to implement. What exactly is meant by employees? I know there are some smaller exceptions, but generally speaking, what do they mean by employees?
Well, generally speaking, it means all employees. So that means full-time and part-time, seasonal and temporary, and domestic and international. So pretty much everyone, and which can be challenging for companies, particularly those with decentralized information systems and payroll systems and a large global workforce.
Is there any guidance with regards to when employees are counted?
Yes, so in the proposed rules back in 2013, the SEC said as of the last day of the fiscal year. There was some flexibility that was granted in the final rules, so employees can count employees any day from the last day of the fiscal year or 3 months prior. They can pick any date during that period of time to make it a little bit easier and help them to comply by the deadline.
So now that we understand what they mean by employees and the population that we're talking about, what guidance is there in terms of how to identify that median employee?
Well, the SEC gave some direction, but they also gave flexibility. So you can do it the straightforward approach, calculate the total compensation for all employees, array the data, pick the middle one. There's also the opportunity to have some flexibility and use another methodology, an estimation technique. And the SEC did give quite a bit of flexibility in that, the caveat being that companies need to describe and disclose their methodology. And so it really is prudent upon the company to think about that approach and make sure that it's sound and that they're comfortable, that others would agree with them.
So they've got some flexibility in terms of the approach. What is measured when you think about kind of that definition of total compensation?
Sure. It's the same definition that's used today for the CEO in the summary compensation table that's published in the proxy. So it includes pretty much everything. Their annual salary, or in the case of employees, wages and overtime, bonus, any incentive, equity and non-equity compensation, the annual change in their pension benefit, and other compensation. So pretty much everything.
So Sue, keeping consistent with this process all along, we're certainly looking at a longer timeline. You mentioned the effective date of this is that first full fiscal year after January 1st, 2017. So what should companies be thinking about now?
Well, we've touched on the surface here of the rules, but there's a lot of details. So I'd say study up not only on the particular rules, but also paying attention to how others are approaching this with different methodologies and ideas about how to identify that median employee. Start planning, put a team together. It's going to take quite a cross-functional team across the organization. And also start thinking about how you're going to collect that data and what methodology you'll use. And I think it's important too to think about communications, not just how you're going to be communicating to the investor community in your proxy disclosure, but a lot of the other stakeholders and different mediums that you may want to use to communicate to them.
Sounds like great advice. We've taken kind of a high-level look at this today, but there's certainly a lot of detail and even a few exceptions you should probably be aware of. So for those watching in, please look at our website or watch for more from World at Work on the CEO pay ratio. For World at Work TV, I'm Allison Avalos.